it was given to so-and-so, that type of thing. Moving on to item 6, where it's talking about different types of wills.
Question?
Sure.
You said to keep it in a safety deposit box. Isn't that kind of, you have to wait and get a court order to get it open?
Actually, no. The probate code requires a custodian of a will to turn over the will to a person who can obtain its probate. So, if you have a death certificate of the box holder, they are required to let you inventory the box, and if the original will is there, then they are required to deliver it to either if you're a designated personal representative in the will, then they have no qualms about handing it to you because you're the person who can go to probate. If you're not the designated PR, I'm trying to remember what the statute says. I think it uses the term interested person, which would be a family member who presumably would be able to submit it to probate as well.
Okay, so that person does not have to have anything but a certified copy of the death certificate to obtain access?
Correct, and ID probably.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a case on the Big Island that I was involved in where it wasn't one of the major institutions, First Hawaiian Bank or Bank of Hawaii. It was another little institution in Hilo, and they weren't turning over the will. And it was kind of comical because it was to the clerk of the court who could definitely get the will probated. And so we had to jump through hoops and educate them, but they ultimately did it. The simple will is what we've kind of talked about, and that's the one that basically says, at my death, I want everything to go to my spouse, and if not my spouse, then it's going to go to my descendants per stirpes, and that's the typical language, which means it goes to my children in equal shares, but if a child is not alive, then that child's share will go down to their children. So that's kind of the catch-all type of simple will. The holographic will is a handwritten will. So even though we talked about how a will needs to be witnessed and self-proved and all of that, under Hawaii law, it does permit a handwritten will. And it basically says a will that does not comply with the witnessing requirements is valid as a holographic will, whether or not witnessed, if the signature and material portions of the document are in the testator's handwriting. So there's an issue as to whether if you got a form will, a printed form will, and you fill in the blanks, is that a holographic will? Does it all have to be in the person's handwriting? I've probated both, including the form will, but the form will had all the key provisions in the person's handwriting. Now, this particular person, and this is the reason why you don't do holographic wills, if this person had gone to an attorney and spent, $500 and got a will, we would have probated it, and the probate would have cost, a couple $1,000s maybe. Instead, he got the form, and he wrote in that it was going to go to, his assets would go to his mother, his 2 brothers, his stepsister, his niece so-and-so, his nephew so-and-so, his other nephew so-and-so, comma, in equal shares, comma, per stirpes. What in the world does that mean? So we went to the family and we tried to get their agreement. I mean, there was all sorts of ways you could interpret that, right? And one of the brothers had died, and his kids were already named, so one of the questions was, well, do his kids take his share, or what happens to his share? And to have a mother per stirpes, that doesn't make any sense at all. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I think it was like $20,000 later, we finally had the answer from the court. But it was really sad because if they'd spent $500 for a will, we could have drafted it correctly. And in that case, I think there were 9 beneficiaries, and we just couldn't get them to agree on what this language meant. So we ended up petitioning the court for instructions. We did it in accordance with our petition for approval of final accounts and asking the court to tell us, okay, now we've done everything, who in the world do we distribute it to? But that's the argument in favor of not doing holographic wills. I've had, this is really sad, I've had suicide notes treated as a holographic will. I mean, sometimes, it's obviously done in contemplation of death, and it will set forth the things that they want taken care of. So we've done that. And one of the things you do need to make sure you cover is you would need, whenever you're dealing with someone's handwriting, you need someone to submit an affidavit saying that they're familiar with that person's handwriting and that this is in fact their handwriting. Even if everyone agrees that it's their handwriting, the judge needs to be satisfied that the handwriting is in fact their handwriting. So if ever you're presenting a holographic will, you need to make sure that's an element of the petition. Your materials talk about an oral will. I don't think oral wills are enforceable in Hawaii. I've never even heard of it. So, soldiers and sailors will, never heard of that one either. Sorry, folks. Contingent or conditional, again, these you're not going to see those in Hawaii to my knowledge. Joint wills, I've never seen one of those. What you will see are the reciprocal wills, where husband and wife are making identical wills, for each other and then for their kids. Sometimes people think that means that they can't change their will. Well, I'm making my will this way because you're making it that way, to benefit each other. And this comes up with kids from second marriages, where you have kids from second marriages, and you might have the husband and wife doing their wills together and agreeing, at least in that meeting, this is how we're going to do it, and I'll leave all mine to all of our kids, and you'll leave all yours to all of our children, whether or not they're from our marriage together. I personally think you really need something in writing confirming that those wills can't be changed. It's called a contract to make a will, and that's governed by the statute as well. Because otherwise, if you don't have that explicit written agreement, I don't think there's anything to prevent the survivor from changing their will entirely, and by that time it would be too late because the first person has already died and their will is already in place. The pour-over will, which is the last one on the top of page 289, item 6, that's what we do a lot of. And the reason for that is, as you probably know, in Hawaii, a lot of clients will have the revocable living trusts. And their revocable living trust is actually a will substitute. And it's saying, I'll just go over this real quickly. You have a settlor, or it's sometimes called a grantor, sometimes called a trustor. That's the person setting up the trust. They're also the trustee. They're going to put their assets in the trust during their lifetime. And their trust typically says something like, well, while I'm trustee, I can do whatever I darn well please. If I become incapacitated, then my spouse or my child or whoever is going to take over as successor trustee, and they're going to have the responsibility and authority to handle all of the property in this trust. And then at my death, the trust will provide that my assets are to be distributed as follows, either going outright to the kids or possibly keeping things in trust for a longer period of time, keeping things in trust for the spouse. There's a real benefit to the revocable living trust because it avoids probate at death, although probate's not that hard anymore. But more importantly, it avoids conservatorships in the event the person becomes incapacitated. And conservatorships can be very expensive, particularly if they're contested. And if you have everything in your revocable living trust with a designated trustee, you should be able to avoid that. getting back to the pour-over will, all a pour-over will says is, at my death, if there are assets that I forgot to put into my revocable living trust, I want them added to my revocable living trust. And therefore, it's the revocable living trust document that really says who gets what when you go. You would still need to do a probate with a pour-over will, because the whole idea of probate is to transfer the ownership from the person's individual name into their revocable trust. Yes?
But you still need to do it if it's under $100,000 though?
No. In that case, you would have the successor trustee use the affidavit of collection. Okay.